Picture Joshua on the west bank of the Jordan, looking east toward a city he is not supposed to be able to take. Not a figure in a felt board illustration, not the Sunday school silhouette holding a ram's horn, a field commander, mid-50s, 40 years of desert logistics behind him. He has watched an entire generation of soldiers die without ever fighting a real battle. The generation before them refused to try, and now it is his turn. What he is looking at is not just a city. It is a problem, a military engineering problem that, by every calculation available to him in 1400 BCE, should be unsolvable. Jericho sits at 258 meters below sea level, the lowest inhabited city on Earth. It controls the single most viable crossing point of the Jordan River into Canaan. Whoever holds Jericho controls the road north, controls the road south, controls the ridge pass that leads to the highlands where the rest of the campaign has to go. You cannot go around it. You cannot ignore it. You have to take it. And the walls. Archaeological excavations at es-Sultan, the confirmed site of ancient Jericho, have revealed a defensive system that makes modern military engineers stop and pay attention. An outer retaining wall roughly 1.5 meters thick, an embankment rising at a steep angle, then a mud brick wall at the top of that embankment, estimated at 8 to 10 meters high. That is a 4-story building sitting on top of a slope, specifically designed to prevent siege ladders from finding purchase. The city had a water source inside its walls. The spring of Elisha, still flowing today, gave Jericho the one thing a besieged city needs most: the ability to wait. Joshua's army did not have siege towers, no battering rams on record, no catapults, those were centuries away. What he had was roughly 40,000 fighting men according to Numbers 26, and the tactical problem of forcing a walled city without any of the conventional tools that ancient warfare used to do it. So hell, the numbers first. Before the tactics, run the numbers, because the logistics alone tell you something important. Israel's camp in the plains of Moab was feeding somewhere between 600,000 and 2 million people, depending on how you interpret the census figures. Joshua 3 records the crossing of the Jordan as happening during flood season. The river was at its banks. That crossing, over a river running at full capacity, with that many people plus livestock plus supply carts, represents a logistical operation that would challenge a modern military. They managed it in a single day. By the time the army appeared outside Jericho's walls, they had already demonstrated something critical. They could move. They could coordinate. They could execute a complex multi-element maneuver under pressure. Jericho's defenders would have seen this. They would have been counting. Joshua 2 tells us Rahab reported to the 2 spies that the entire city was terrified. Not surprised, terrified. The word the text uses is melted. The people's hearts had melted. That is a specific psychological state with specific tactical consequences. A garrison that believes it cannot win will not fight the same way as one that believes it can. Jericho's defense before the First Circuit was already psychologically compromised. That matters, file it away. Here is where modern military analysts start leaning forward. Joshua's instructions from Joshua 6 describe a precise, repeating protocol. Armed guards lead the procession. 7 priests carrying rams' horn trumpets walk ahead of the ark. The ark itself follows. A rear guard closes the formation. Absolute silence from the fighting men, no shouting, no battle cries, no words, only the trumpets. They march this circuit once per day for 6 days. Then on the 7th day, 7 circuits. Read that through a military lens, and something becomes clear immediately. This is not a religious procession in place of a military strategy. This is a military strategy using a religious procession as its mechanism. Consider what 6 days of silent, disciplined, unreachable marching does to a defending garrison. Day 1, the enemy walks the perimeter and leaves. No attack. What does that mean? Day 2, they come back. same formation, same silence, same trumpets, they leave again. Day 3. The garrison is now in a problem. Do they sally out and engage? The Israelite force is too large. Do they continue waiting? Their food and morale are being consumed. The spring keeps them watered, but water is not the only resource a garrison needs. They need information. And the information they are getting is that their enemy has the discipline to do something no attacking army does: wait without attacking repeatedly in full sight. By day 6, the psychological damage is calculable. Every soldier on those walls has spent 6 days watching a force that clearly could rush them but chooses not to. That silence is more threatening than noise. It says, "We are not afraid of you. We are not in a hurry. We will take this city when we choose to." This is what modern military doctrine calls information operations, shaping the enemy's perception before the kinetic action begins. Kathleen Kenyon's excavations at es-Sultan in the 1950s found evidence of the outer wall collapsing outward, not inward, as would happen from a ram or internal explosion. Outward, as if the wall fell away from the city rather than being pushed through. The mud brick construction of Jericho's defensive wall, combined with an earthquake zone, the Jordan Rift Valley is seismically active, has led structural engineers to reconstruct how a precise seismic event could have produced exactly the wall failure pattern the archaeological record shows. The timing of that seismic event, on exactly the 7th day, at exactly the moment of the shout, that is not engineering. That is something else. But the engineering was already in place to take full advantage of it the instant it happened. The role of the shout. Joshua 6:20 records the moment precisely. The priests blew the trumpets. Joshua commanded the people to shout, and the wall fell flat. Military historians who study ancient siege psychology point to the shout as the completion of a 6-day psychological operation. 6 days of silence followed by a coordinated, full-throated roar from 40,000 soldiers simultaneously. The acoustic force alone, in the Jordan Valley's natural amphitheater terrain, would have registered as something beyond a human sound. John Wheeler, a structural engineer who published analysis on ancient mud brick construction failure, noted that mud brick walls with existing stress fractures can be tipped to collapse by the right vibrational frequency applied at the right moment. The trumpet blasts from 7 rams' horns, amplified against stone, followed immediately by a massed human shout. This is not a quiet moment. This is a calculated release of acoustic energy after 6 days of deliberate silence. The silence made the shout possible. The shout made the wall fall, and the wall fell outward, giving 40,000 soldiers a flat approach surface into the city instead of a standing obstacle. Rahab's house on the wall, she is specifically recorded as surviving, along with her household. She was told to gather everyone inside and mark her window with a scarlet cord. The spies knew which section of the wall to tell her to use. Certain sections of Jericho's defensive perimeter, based on the topography and the location of the spring, would have been structural weak points. A family of wall dwellers in the ancient Near East typically built into the more stable sections. The instruction to use a specific window with a specific cord suggests the spies had more than spiritual intelligence. They had structural intelligence. What modern generals actually study here? The United States Army Command and General Staff College has used the Jericho campaign in coursework on what they call effects-based operations, achieving military objectives by targeting psychological and structural effects rather than simply killing opposing soldiers. The principle is this: if you can make an enemy believe the outcome is inevitable before you apply force, you reduce the force required. You also reduce the cost in lives, in resources, in time. Joshua achieved total military victory over a fortified city in 7 days without a siege train, without battering rams, without the engineering infrastructure that any other army of the period would have considered mandatory. His intelligence operation was thorough. 2 spies inside the city who came back with specific structural and psychological data. His logistics had already demonstrated to the enemy that Israel could execute complex operations. His March protocol applied maximum psychological pressure at minimum material cost. And when the moment of force arrived, it was overwhelming, coordinated, and instant. The principles behind that sequence: intelligence, demonstration of capability, psychological attrition, then decisive concentrated force, appear in doctrine used by every major military on Earth today. That is not a coincidence. That is a battle plan that worked, and working battle plans get studied. Stand at the edge of es-Sultan today. The Jordan Valley spreads out to the east, heat rising off the desert floor in visible waves. The spring still runs. Volunteers still come to excavate. The mud brick layers are still there, pressed flat by time into the earth. Somewhere in those layers is the physical record of what happened. A wall that fell outward. A city that burned. A story that has been retold in Sunday schools and military colleges simultaneously for 3,000 years. The man who planned this campaign had never taken a city before. He had been a spy, a servant, a successor. He had spent 40 years learning patience in a desert while everyone around him argued about whether the thing was even possible. He crossed an uncrossable river at flood stage. He marched silent circles around an unbreachable wall for 6 days. He gave the shout on the 7th. And the wall came down. There is a question in that sequence worth sitting with. Not the theological question, though that one is legitimate. The strategic question: how did a man who had never commanded a city siege design a siege protocol that modern military analysts spend semesters unpacking? Whoever you think gave him those instructions, the architecture of that plan has held up for 3,000 years of scrutiny. That is not something that happens by accident. That does not happen with vague divine instruction and lucky timing. The plan was specific. The execution was disciplined. The result was total. That tells you something about how seriously Joshua took what he was told. It tells you something about what happens when a commander trusts his intelligence source completely and executes without improvisation. And it tells you something about what it means to be given a plan that is bigger than your experience and to follow it exactly anyway. If this kind of history is what you came here for, the systems underneath the scripture, the strategy underneath the miracle, the channel is here. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because Jericho was just the beginning of the campaign. The rest of it is just as interesting.